I'm Andrew Cuomo. And unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know that the Democratic primary did not go the way I had hoped. To the 440,000 New Yorkers who voted for me, a sincere thank you. Thank you for believing in me, in my agenda, and in my experience. And I am truly sorry that I let you down. But as my grandfather used to say, when you get knocked down, learn the lesson and pick yourself back up and get in the game. And that is what I'm going to do. The fight to save our city isn't over. Only 13% of New Yorkers voted in the June primary. The general election is in November, and I am in it to win it. My opponent, Mr. Mamdani, offers slick slogans, but no real solutions.
Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is officially back in the race for the New York City mayoral election, and this is the result of a bunch of different data points that shows that not only is Mamdani not as popular as the progressive media wants you to believe, but in reality, Cuomo looks like, as of right now, one of the closest candidates who is capable of beating him. However, in a new, more recent shocking poll, one of the things that we discover is that Curtis Sliwa, the Republican that people have been encouraging to drop out in order to endorse Eric Adams, is in reality significantly more popular than Eric Adams, and honestly within striking distance if this four-person race actually maintains the way that it is going forward. So this is what we're going to talk about today: the newly discovered vulnerabilities in Zoran Mamdani that, by the way, Andrew Cuomo's campaign during the primary should have been highlighting all along and failed to do so, and of course, who should drop out versus who shouldn't in this upcoming mayoral race. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you to everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
The Mamdani campaign quickly responding to Cuomo's candidacy with a statement reading in part, "He's not fighting for you. He's running only to repair his soiled reputation and protect the billionaire Trump donors who fund his campaign. We beat Cuomo once. Together, we will beat him again."
So that's Zoran Mamdani's statement in response to Governor Andrew Cuomo announcing that he is not leaving the New York City mayoral race. And part of the reason why Cuomo is saying that he's not leaving is because only a small percentage of people voted in the Democratic primary. But I need to make this 100% clear to everybody out there in the audience: that has nothing to do with Andrew Cuomo's decision. Had he won the mayoral election, he would not be happy if any other Democrat that he beat in the primary actually wanted him to step out of the race. The reason Andrew Cuomo is running in the general is because it looks like his name recognition could put him over the top in beating Mamdani. And there are a bunch of different polls that show he is the closest candidate right behind Mamdani in a four-person race. However, one of the most devastating ones for Zoran is the head-to-head between Cuomo and Mamdani that shows Cuomo winning by over 50% of the vote and basically crushing Mamdani, who would be down 15 points. So this is a Harris poll from July 7th, and it shows right now in a four-person race, Mamdani with 26% as the Democratic candidate. Andrew Cuomo is up around 23%, Curtis Sliwa at 22%, and Eric Adams at 13%.
I see somebody who's still unpopular with New York City voters. The most recent public poll on this had Cuomo's unfavorable rating at 47% with New York City voters. His favorable rating lower than that, just 41%. So if you're Adams and you're Sliwa and you're looking at Cuomo saying he's staying in this race, they're looking at him saying, hey, you had your shot at Mamdani. You proved you couldn't get it done. If you're Cuomo and you're Sliwa, here's what you see. The most recent public poll, favorable, unfavorable for Adams, 68. Unfavorable. His favorable just 19%. But Sliwa's got a track record here. He was the Republican nominee 4 years ago, just like he's the Republican nominee now. He ran against Adams 4 years ago. How did he do? He got 28% of the vote. He lost to Eric Adams by more than 40 points. So Adams and Cuomo.
Now look, on this channel, we don't accept the word of one pollster because in reality, they could be sampling a group of people that just happens to skew towards Andrew Cuomo, and this would be quite easy to do if you skewed to over 35, as Mamdani's base is largely under 35. But in reality, a lot of different polls that have multiple candidates in the race consistently show that the Adams-Cuomo vote totals are more than the vote total that we would see for Zoran Mamdani. So it it seems obvious that one of them need to drop out of the race. Now, of course, Curtis Sliwa is also facing pressures to leave the race as well, but I have this weird feeling that the Republican voters for Sliwa, the people that want to go in that direction, are not likely to jump on board with either Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams. So in my humblest of humble opinions, I think, truth be told, the person that needs to leave, or one of the persons that needs to leave, is whoever is polling worse against him head to head between Adams and Andrew Cuomo. And while a lot of people think that they like Eric Adams because they haven't lived in New York City and they think that he would be the better candidate, the reality is what it is, and this man is consistently polling at or below the Republican candidate Sliwa because his political career is done. And I'm going to give you guys a prediction, which is if this race continues and we get close to the fall, Eric Adams will eventually drop out and endorse former Governor Andrew Cuomo. And the reason for that is that it appears that the Democratic strategy is to get Mamdani to not take this seat, because Mamdani will be an absolute disaster for the Democratic Party. Again, imagine reintroducing the ideas of defunding the police, which Zoran Mamdani is unambiguously in favor of. He has multiple tweets to that effect.
Are you for defunding the police? Are you for a serious reform that people can see on the ground?
I am in favor of defunding the police.
And of course, he said in interviews that he is in favor of defunding the police and all of the disastrous policies that will result from his commitment to socialism. Now, on this channel, we have talked about, of course, the Israel situation with Mamdani. There are some people who are absolutely insane, and they say, oh, because he's on Team Muslim and against Israel, we should just support him no matter what. But in reality, if you look at policy for New Yorkers, Mamdani is the absolute worst. Let us take his rent freeze for rent stabilized tenants that he is advocating for. Now, I've talked about ad nauseum that these policies like rent stabilization and rent control end up making housing worse in cities where they are implemented. New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco all have high levels of rent stabilization and rent control, and guess what? Prices always go up, and a rent freeze is very likely to push more units off the market due to the fact that these rent stabilized apartments are already not that profitable. Again, there was a candidate who put out a video and people criticized him for being a Mamdani copycat that was advocating for the wrong side. Let me play that for you right here.
There's a game of hot potato going on in Harlem with this building. The owner of this building can't pay the mortgage, the rents don't cover the cost to operate, so they stopped paying, and the bank started a foreclosure. That's when the owner said, take it, and the bank said, whoa, we don't want it, the building is losing money and there's no way to fix it. So now they're literally suing each other over who gets stuck with the building. What's even crazier, this is the second bank dealing with this problem. The first one collapsed because it owned this building and many others like it. How many other buildings? Thousands.
And he highlights this insane scenario where a building has gone bust, and right now, instead of the bank trying to take this New York City real estate, what's happening is they're suing the landlord, and the landlord is suing the bank to make sure they could dump this property on the other person. And when you set aside the fact that this guy is out in the streets and he may be doing a Mamdani style video, in reality, he's highlighting something absolutely crucial, which is again, how rent control and rent stabilization destabilize the housing market and remove supply when it's desperately needed. And there's a long, stupid thread that tries to debunk everything that is asserted in this person's video and say that it's actually not about rent stabilization or rent control, before ultimately proving out that it is about rent stabilization and rent control. And I will explain this to you so you can understand it, and obviously so you can get where Mamdani is on this issue. So when your building has units that are under rent stabilization and rent control, you're basically screwed. There is no way that you can actually get those apartment units to become profitable due to the fact that, again, they are locked in by law. However, a couple of years ago, they used to have an exemption. And again, this is highlighted in the thread that actually is trying to debunk the idea that this is caused by rent stabilization, where if you do serious renovations to the apartment, you can apply for a new assessment of the median rent in the area and get a higher adjustment than you would normally get, because typically under rent stabilization laws, increases are capped at 1.5% a year, which, by the way, Mamdani wants to bring that to 0%, but make no mistake about it, these slight increases that you get under rent stabilization currently are no big deal to begin with, especially when they have these devastating consequences. So the owner of this building ends up renovating these apartments. And the reason why he renovated these apartments is to get that adjustment because the rent that was being brought in for these very old apartments was no longer profitable. But what ultimately ended up happening? The New York City legislature, in their infinite wisdom, decided that they were going to remove this ability midway through the project, and they weren't going to grandfather in construction projects that were already started. So instantly, this renovation became unprofitable. The landlord was forced to stop the project to stop hemorrhaging money and essentially defaulted on his loan to shift the burden to the bank because he was never going to be able to recoup the costs in order to actually, fix up these apartments. So instead of old apartments in the old system or newly renovated apartments that are still under rent control, but they're adjusted to modern rents, what you ultimately end up with is 4 destroyed apartments mid-renovation and a game of hot potato between the landlord and between the bank. But in a much broader sense, what you have effectively is a decrease in supply on the market, and this is why we have this weird system in the city of New York where rents are sky high, yet we have a lot of inventory that's off the market because it's unprofitable due to the policies that are championed by Mamdani. And by the way, Zoran Mamdani has gone full communist, talking about seizing the means of production.
What the purpose is about this entire project, it's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And obviously raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given. We have to continue to elect more socialists. And we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right? Or whether it's the end goal of seizing the means of production.
He's also talked about the desire to create conditions so that the government can take over more property, even though New York City is already the largest landlord in the city of New York.
The housing crisis. The solution has to be moving toward the full decommodification of housing. In other words, moving away from the status quo, in which most people access housing by purchasing it on the market, and toward a future where we guarantee high-quality housing to all as a human right. So how can we do it? We can start by making sure people who access housing on the private market have ironclad protections against abuse and exploitation. But to go further, toward the Vienna model, we'll have to go beyond the market. We can establish community land trusts to gradually buy up housing on the private market and convert it to community ownership. We can give tenants a right of first refusal to buy out their landlords when buildings go up for sale. And we can fully commit to a new era of social housing.
Now again, Mamdani's housing policies play into these disastrous consequences. He wants to freeze the rents for the rent-stabilized units. A lot of buildings with rent-stabilized units have mixed buildings, so that means the rents are going to have to go up in the market units in order to compensate, and of course, we're going to see more and more units being pulled off the market when they become unprofitable, especially if they're not already rented. So supply is going to go down, demand's going to go up, and of course, 44% of our housing or apartments rentals in the city of New York are under this rent stabilization program, which you have to win a lottery to get in. So every normal resident of the city of New York, like myself, who rents in the greater 56% of apartments that are market rate, are going to have to pay sky-high prices as a result. And again, this isn't hypothetical, this isn't theoretical. Javier Milei got rid of rent control in Argentina, and in Buenos Aires, we saw supply go up 300% and rents drop 40%. Austin is a city where rents are now falling. I know they are up since COVID, but they've fallen for their peak due to the fact that they allow building and they have very little zoning restrictions, and the Austin City Council actually went a step further and reduced zoning ordinances and requirements even further. The same is true in multiple different Texas cities because their state laws are set up to incentivize building, and the same is true in Florida, where again, prices are falling. And again, cities in Texas are able to achieve stable or falling rents within the confines of their cities without any rent control or rent stabilization laws. And the reason for this is because they're illegal statewide. Such schemes cannot exist in that state, and of course, they allow building. They heavily restrict the ability for local municipalities in order to use zoning or any kind of methods in order to enforce NIMBYism, and because of that, supply is allowed to meet demand. And again, if you think rent stabilization is a different way to achieve the same objective, at what point point do you think we would be able to stabilize rents in New York? 44% of apartments are already covered by these programs, and yet rent keeps skyrocketing. In San Francisco and Los Angeles, over 2/3 of the apartments are covered by rent stabilization, and those are both areas that are characterized by higher housing costs. Reason actually put out a video, and I'm going to link it in full in the description, that compared San Francisco to Austin to show you how each city ends up dealing with their housing crisis. And what you find out is that newer, fancier buildings are offering all sorts of perks and, of course, gimmicks like giving you 4 months of rent discounted or 2 months of rent off when you move in, due to the fact that market conditions regulate and reign supreme in the city of Austin, while in San Francisco, rent control, rent stabilization, and zoning is what reigns supreme, and that's why the average person can't afford to live in San Francisco. Contrary to the narrative of Mamdani as a change agent, we've already tried his policies. Bill de Blasio had rent frozen for rent-stabilized units 3 different years in the city of New York when he was mayor not too long ago, and guess what? Rents rose all 3 of those years for everyone else, because the issue is we don't have enough supply. The price of housing, like anything, is regulated with supply and demand. Zoran Mamdani has pledged to decrease the supply of housing by blocking private developers unless they meet his standards, which again, who the hell is he to dictate what makes a building functional and what makes a building desirable? And of course, his standards are all tied up in rent stabilization, which means that we will get higher prices under him based on his policies in terms of housing. And in terms of spending, the guy is pledging to borrow $100 billion in order to build 200,000 apartment units, which, if you guys aren't good at math, is $500,000 per apartment unit, which again is the starting price for the government project. And we've seen every time the government tries to do this, they usually go double the budget. And as we saw in the city of Chicago, over $1 million per apartment unit is not something outside of the norm. And of course, this is the closest candidate to Brandon Johnson in Chicago. So we're looking at disastrous financial ruin, a decrease in housing supply, and again, more money wasted on public housing, which you shouldn't need to build when prices are this high, because the high prices should incentivize more building. Now again, that's one of Zoran Mamdani's main issues that he will be absolutely horrible on if elected, and a good reason not to vote for him for any office, let alone mayor of the city of New York. And I think the reason why Zoran Mamdani's polling seems to have a ceiling is because people are starting to realize what a disaster he would actually be. Now, of course, the Democrats are likely to coalesce. They'll probably do it around Cuomo. Hopefully that's enough to defeat Zoran Mamdani, which is the #1 objective. However, I'm still optimistic based on the polling numbers that Curtis Sliwa could sneak in and become the mayor, because wouldn't it be nice for the left to nominate a communist? And the result of that is the former head of the Guardian Angels, Curtis Sliwa, actually becoming the mayor of the city of New York. However, that's a pipe dream. But again, Adams and Cuomo gotta figure this out. They gotta look at the data, they gotta look at the polling, realize which one is better, and actually have the other candidate leave. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about bad news for Mamdani. Till next time.